Luigi's Mansion is bigger than Silent Hill. It's bigger than Resident Evil. And you can't even do that little cope where, like, well, those have film adaptations because Luigi was in the Super Mario Bros. Movie, the 15th highest grossing film of all time. Luigi's Mansion is probably, quite handedly, going to be the most successful horror movie for kids ever produced when it does get made. I don't know if it'll be like the movie that they make after the Super Mario Galaxy movie or if they'll wait a while, but I'm sure the Luigi's Mansion movie is incoming. But right now, we do need to acknowledge this fact that Luigi's Mansion 3 has sold more than 1 million copies than the entire Silent Hill franchise. So, seriously, Konami produced Silent Hill 2 Remake and Silent Hill F, and both of them were outperformed by Luigi's Mansion 3, a game that is 6 years old. First of all, this really goes to show you just how successful Luigi's Mansion 3 is, because right now there's this weird mindset in the Nintendo community to push this narrative that only the original Luigi's Mansion is good and 2 and 3 are disasters. No, like these games are not only successful, they have eclipsed the success of Resident Evil and Silent Hill, making Luigi's Mansion by far the biggest horror game franchise on the planet. And it's something that people don't like to acknowledge. They want to write it off. They want to say Luigi's Mansion isn't a real horror game because it isn't rated M and it doesn't have blood and Luigi doesn't kill his wife at the end. Like that apparently means that it's not a real horror game. But the reality is, Luigi's Mansion is a horror game. It has all the sensibilities of one, and it really, truly has established itself as the tippy top of the genre. A genre that traditionally was seen as PlayStation exclusive. You know, Eternal Darkness was already better than Silent Hill, and now we have Luigi's Mansion outperforming Silent Hill in every way, shape, and form. And there is no hope of recovery. You know, Konami is never going to get that genie back in the bottle. You know, Team Silent is like the Beatles at this point, overrated frauds that were disbanded, and their fans have just spent the past several years like, well, if they just stayed together, they would have kept up making new hits and staying relevant. Like, no. The reality is, Silent Hill has been a dead IP since Silent Hill 4 came out. Okay, people do not like acknowledging that Silent Hill never took off. It was never that popular. It is basically the Ultima of horror games at this point, where people kind of put it on a pedestal and say it's way deeper and more complex than it actually is. Like, it's a joke. And I am very, very happy to see that Luigi's Mansion is outperforming this slop. I am very, very happy to see that Mario, that Nintendo, has beaten Konami at their own game and have established themselves as the superior horror game icon. It's just so exciting to see. And especially considering that a Luigi's Mansion 4 is likely on the horizon, which will be the second game that Next Level Games produces under Nintendo's ownership. So what that means is that we are going to see Luigi's Mansion 4 on Switch 2 looking better, playing better, like refining the concepts from 2 and 3 and really pushing this highly successful horror game franchise further, while games like Silent Hill Remake 2 completely botched the original and Silent Hill F completely just, I don't know, are just feminist propaganda. You know, Resident Evil Requiem is coming out on Switch too. It is very possible that Luigi's Mansion 4 and Resident Evil are going to launch the same year, and Luigi's Mansion is going to outperform it. And it really needs to be understood more about Resident Evil is that these games sell on sale. So Resident Evil is the kind of IP that people pick up because, like, oh, I wonder what Resident Evil is like now. I'll just buy it for $5 on Steam. Like, you know, this is why the sales numbers for Resident Evil are so high, and yet nobody seems to be a fan of any of these games. You know, the series peaked with like 4, and they haven't really recovered since. Like, if Luigi's Mansion 4 comes out next year around, and competes directly with Resident Evil Requiem, you are going to see Luigi's Mansion 4 quite handedly just destroying Resident Evil Requiem. It's going to look better. It's going to play better. It's going to be scarier. It's going to have a lot more going for it. And above all else, it is going to be a better video game because this is the reason why Luigi's Mansion from the very beginning stopped all of these other horror franchises is because they understood that these games don't need to be scary, they need to be fun to play. And that's something that Silent Hill especially didn't understand is that you're not supposed to scare the player. You're supposed to be in this specific situation. You're supposed to scare the character. You're supposed to be in this situation and you have to resolve it. The player being scared is not as important as the player having fun. Okay. This is why Fatal Frame 5 and 4 are better than the recent Silent Hill and Resident Evil games, is that those games are actually fun to play. Like, horror games being scary is completely unnecessary and completely misses the point of video games as a whole. And I think it's this realization that is going to lead Luigi's Mansion into becoming a huge cultural phenomenon over the next couple of years. Because this was an IP that traditionally was very much hated and despised and downplayed. As recently as a couple of years ago, I was seeing people like try and argue that Resident Evil 1 remake was better than this. That it had multiple endings and it had all this content and it had all these things you can do. But like, well, is it as much fun to play? Do people look back on it? In fact, I've seen Capcom even say they're going to remake that game again. They've even released statements saying that they don't want people to play the old ones and they want people to play the remakes because they're so bad. Like Capcom knows that they can't compete with Luigi's Mansion. They're scared. Like they're scared of Mario's brother exploring a haunted house because it's better than anything they've ever done. And they all know it. It's why Shinji Mikami retired. It's why the series went into this action based mindset. It's why these games aren't scary. They know they can't compete with Luigi's Mansion. The only thing keeping Resident Evil and Silent Hill relevant at this stage is the brand recognition from normies. People who know Pyramid Head from like the movie and like want to experience it for themselves, and they come away disappointed because Silent Hill and Resident Evil aren't that good. But like these were the premier horror game franchises back in the day. But these days they are getting outshone by Green Mario. Luigi's Mansion is bigger and better than Silent Hill and Resident Evil.